relative to guitar,
Which
bass.
is why I enjoy the finger up the bottom on a pretty regular basis, and I've learned to
Annually.
love it. I've learned to love it. Yeah.
What about the other test, the PSA test, the blood test?
Well,
that
I
sort
do
of
belt and braces. I do both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and since my brother died of colon cancer a few years ago, and my pal at the White House, Tony Snow, was the press secretary for Bush for a while, and a keen amateur flute player, as well as a arch Republican. He died of colon cancer too after a battle for what lasted 4 or 5 years. And the last thing he said to me was, "You really have to go for a check, you know, because your brother died. You're a high risk," because Tony's mother died of it. And kind of just out of, I don't know, out of politeness to Tony, I think in a way I dutifully took myself off, and since then I have a year off this year, you know, for good behaviour, but I'm pretty much from here on in I shall be going for bad bottom experiences for the rest of my days. Although the chap that does this, I said to him, "We're going to have to do this every year," and he said, "Well, every year and then maybe we'll make it once every 2 years and see how things go." And I said, "Well, but after that, maybe every 3 years or every 4 years." He said, "Well, let's not think that far ahead. You'll be dead from some other cause by then anyway. You're an old guy."
Does he at least read a little poetry before he does it?
The good thing about the guy that I have is that he's one of those surgeons who I think is very, very, very careful about something that is quite an invasive procedure, and he says, you know, he's never actually had a he's had to mend a few bad accidents as a result of other people carrying out colonoscopies and puncturing the wall of the colon, and which is pretty nasty if it happens, because you really got to get on and sort it very quickly.
I would imagine.
He's had to fix a few other people's mistakes, but he said so far he hasn't made one, and in fact the risk is actually very small, whereas compared to the risk of, even if you have no family history, you know, colon, rectal cancers, these are, you know, pretty major.
Yeah, in the ways to go, it's not up there on the I want to go that way.
It's not, no, and so, you know, just because you go for regular checkups doesn't mean you're not going to get it. It just means you're going to have maybe a little warning, and there's a fighting chance you can do something about it. But some people, in spite of their diligent attempts to ward off such things, don't get lucky. Because Tony was already going regularly because his mother had died from colon cancer, and from one check to the next, he had essentially a full-blown, you know, within 1 year, it had gone from nothing to all the way, and so, you know, you do in a way, some people would rather, you know, the blissful ignorance thing, say, "Oh, I don't want to think about this stuff. If it gets me, it gets me." But, you know, I want to do everything I can to ward off bad things. So I tend to, without turning into a hypochondriac.
Wouldn't it be wonderful to just go in our sleep at 92?
That'd be a bit boring, wouldn't it? Just to go to sleep and then not wake up, and you've missed the biggest event of your life, really.
At least a Last Supper, then. Just a really good meal.
Yeah, well,
glass of something.
I don't. I think there's a romanticism in the world of entertainment that it's probably preferable to die with your boots on. You know, there've been quite a few entertainers who have literally just died on stage. A lot of comedians have died on stage, not because they weren't funny, just because they conked out. And you know, I can think of a couple of really famous and favourite British comics who both died, you know, collapsed on stage and died immediately or within a few minutes, and you always think, well, that was the way to go, you know. At least you exited the world stage left with laughter ringing in people's ears.
Hopefully got a really
that's
good
what
punchline. Yeah. Who's the funniest British comedian of all time, in your estimation?
That's a hard one, because in Britain we have a history of comedy which is a little surreal and weird, and it's I think we like to claim that it started in the 50s, in that post-war era, with radio comedy, and it was a direct lineage from some early stuff that morphed into the Goon Show, and then that kind of strongly influenced the early Monty Python, who in turn influenced a series of other comic groups and acts that through the 60s, 70s and 80s became the new thing. So it's hard to pick any one. You know, it would be tempting to say Monty Python, but the trouble is, when you actually go back and watch most of the episodes of the relatively short series of Monty Python, a lot of the sketches are really pretty embarrassing and not very funny at all. I mean, there are some great moments, but they're great moments not necessarily because they were actually belly laugh. They were great moments because they were pushing the boundaries of what was funny. And they made you think, and they made you reevaluate what humour and comedy was really about. And I think the fact that none of these guys were really professional comics, they were academics from one of Britain's most famous universities, and just happened to kind of get together and do this stuff in a rather schoolboyish and amateurish way. That was the endearing thing about a lot of British comedy. It wasn't born out of traditional showbiz values. It was actually, in some cases, it came from quite an intellectual position. You know, people who were, you know, well-groomed young men at the most elite universities who discovered being funny was
a way to get checks.
Yeah, better than just you know, better than just getting a good degree and becoming a lawyer or whatever.
Cheese Shop is still my favorite Monty Python.
Yeah, well, it's all that.
Cheddar.
All that stuff.
Don't get much call for that around here. Eddie Izzard's brilliant.
Well, he's one of those kind of lateral thinking comics who's got a thread, who he can kind of go off at a tangent and then come back again, and he's pretty good, and a brave man, because he goes and does his act in foreign tongues which he can barely speak, you know, and he's a very brave man for really pushing it. And he's also done some serious acting which he's sort of quite convincing in too. Yes, I mean, Eddie is one of my favourite guys. A very confusing man in terms of his propensity for cross-dressing and generally doing things, but like
so be it,
man. Like more than one other comedian, they feel the need to prove themselves in unusual ways. And he recently ran a series of marathons. I mean, he actually ran the whole way around the UK consecutively, day after day after day, doing effectively a marathon every day. And no one thought he could do that. And even he didn't think he could do it, but he actually made it. I mean, crippled, but it was an extraordinary feat of endurance for a guy who actually likes to dress up in women's clothing. You know, there are a few more manly souls on planet Earth than Eddie Izzard. He's a real man, in spite of the fact he likes kind of stretchy, clingy things.